Good evening. I'm Paul Fredette, and with me here is Karen, my wife, and together we minister to hermits and religious solitaries throughout the world through Ravensbread Ministries, right here from our home in the mountains of western North Carolina. It's a pleasure to have this time to share with you all again. We thank you for joining us, and we want to welcome whoever may be joining with us for the first time this evening. Over the past few months, we've been reflecting and examining the resurgence of eremitic life, the life of hermits, and the vocation of religious solitaries, especially as it's appeared in the Western world over the past 50, 60, maybe even 75 years now. In the most recent programs that we have shared with you, we've turned our attention to the future, and we've tried to look at where this vocation might be headed as we look at the horizon. And in order to do this in a prayerful way, we've put it in the context of examining and reflecting on the Beatitudes as they appear to us in the Gospel of St. Matthew in the 5th chapter. Last week, we talked quite a bit about what it means to be poor in spirit. And this evening, we'd like to take this time to look at what it means to truly mourn. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Words from Matthew's Gospel. They say that when we die, we won't be criticized for having failed to work miracles. We won't be accused of having failed to be theologians or contemplatives, but we'll certainly have some explaining to do to God for not having sufficiently mourned. When the scriptures use the term, blessed are they who mourn, we could also say, blessed are they who grieve, or blessed are they who weep. The word used in the Greek New Testament, penthein, signifies a very deep, intense, and heartbreaking sorrow. Poverty of spirit, which we reflected upon last week, is inseparable from mourning. Without poverty of spirit, I'm always on guard to keep what I have for myself, to keep myself for myself. The immediate consequence of being poor in spirit is becoming sensitive to the pain, the losses, the heartache of people around me. Not only those whom I happen to know and to care for, but also people I don't know. People I don't even want to know. To the extent that I open my heart to others, I will do whatever I can to help, pray, and share what I have. Even share myself.
When we consider that part of the eremitic vocation is not only to live the Beatitudes, but to proclaim that a new future is possible for everyone, we immediately bump into the question, well, how does a silent, unknown, and unseen person let folks know that the reign of God is already present among them, among us? If we accept that whatever affects one person in the web affects all of us, we can glimpse the answer. We also begin to understand why a hermit would be a person who grieves, who mourns over the sorrows of the world, which are endless. A person who lives in silence hears much, even the unspoken suffering of many. Hermits, by their calling, become deep listeners. By their choice of solitude, they are not distracted from whomever or whatever is speaking to their hearts. One who listens deeply to the pain of others allows that pain to be imprinted on their very soul. In a very deep way, they embody, carry in their bodies the sufferings of many, and so learn how to truly mourn. The hermitage is not a place to plot the saving of the world by dreaming up grandiose plans of changing governments, educating people, renewing cultures. Rather, it is where the pain of the world is simply accepted in all its darkness and desolation, its tears and despair. When a hermit is called upon to listen as another unburdens their heart to them, he or she does just that. They listen deeply and with great care. They offer something more than sympathy. For that, no matter how it is given, can be resented. It can even be harmful if it weakens another person who is hanging on to their own courage by a thread. Hermits do not minimize what is told them by, "Oh, you should be grateful that," or "this isn't as bad as," or nor do they offer superficial platitudes. "Everything will look better tomorrow. It's really not as bad as you think." And above all, they do not say, there, don't cry," because they know that often it's only tears that will lead the way to the genuine comfort that a person needs. What do we mean when we say comfort? At its root, in Latin, it means to stand strong with. And that is what a hermit is called upon to do. Only that. Often the hardest thing, which is to listen to hurt and sorrow and pain and allow it to be. No passing out an aspirin, no reassuring pat on the back with a "be brave, buck up," and definitely no reassuring someone that prayer will change the situation. Often it won't. And the genuine hermit knows that and admits it. So they accept to simply carry or be with another's pain. They know that the strength to do so will come only from God. It is not found within their own heart or psyche. They will feel pain keenly and will shed tears along with the suffering ones.
As we've said several times in these presentations, in the 21st century, the attitude toward hermits is ambivalent. Where should deeply concerned people, as we posit hermits are, invest their energies and whatever resources they have? When even the richest country in the world, America, has nearly 36 million people living below the poverty line, and 12 million of them are children. While many people are either unaware or simply don't care that a country which raises more food than it can eat is rife with households where children suffer malnutrition. The hermit, the religious solitary, must choose to look squarely at this inexplicable tragedy. In their solitude and in their silence, they must also ask, what has caused this? They must ask it prayerfully and sincerely. Requests for emergency food assistance throughout our world have increased by an average of 14%. An appalling 20% of these requests go unmet. Nearly half of these requests are from working families. Meanwhile, the official surveys indicate that every year more than 350 billion, that's billion with a B, pounds of food available for human consumption in the United States, but that a total of 100 billion pounds, including fresh vegetables, fruit, milk, grain products, are lost to waste by retailers, restaurants, consumers. Tell me what's not to cry about. In other words, up to 1/5 of America's food ends up in landfills each year. The saddest part of this story is that roughly 49 million people could have been adequately fed by these lost resources. In Jesus' meaning about mourning, he probably was referring to those who mourned over all of the evils that beset Israel for its sins. Well, likewise today, it's not only the scandal of the waste of food and the accompanying malnutrition. Today, if God, the holy, the source of our being, is truly the rock-bottom, total concern, total absorbing focus of the hermit, of the solitary, then their hearts and their eyes will weep for the insults that are, as it were, thrown into the face of God with the worldwide denial of bread to the poor. The silent, legal injustice done to the powerless. The denial of human dignity. The crime of human trafficking. The system. And this is not even to speak of the countless murders, rapes, beatings, imprisonments, los desaparecidos, the slow starvation all over Africa, and worldwide the seduction of youth into the use of drugs, alcohol, casual sexual activity. Beneath it all, that fundamental, endemic corruption of our society through racism, bigotry, the hell that is the prison systems all over our world, including right here in America. And on top of everything else, war. War and civil strife.
what does the foregoing that we just listed have to do with hermit life? The hermit hears the cry of the poor as clearly as does the God who is in their heart. The solitary grieves over the diminishment that comes to the whole human family when children are stunted for lack of food, by families that are stunned when their entire lives are wiped out or changed by an act of violence, whether it is from nature or from other human sources. Their tears, the hermit's tears, are not a sign of depression or despair, for these silent weepers do not believe that tears are useless. Instead, such grief becomes a bond which, on the mystical level, unites them with all those for whom they grieve, wherever they may be.
Mm-hmm.
Their very lives grow more and more united with God, who also mourns for the suffering of his children. Something incredibly deep can happen if the hermit will consent to this pain. They achieve a mysterious union with the divine, which consecrates their grief, which transforms tears into saving love, and turns prayer into a powerful means for love to enter our world and act in it.
By losing their lives in God, hermits will let go of panaceas that promise comfort, easy answers, and false security. Religious solitaries will refuse to turn away from the unpalatable truths and distressing facts. Hermits cannot insulate themselves from raw misery, whether it's close at hand or halfway across the globe. Their hearts have to be opened by their intimacy with God, who cares for all of his children. If at times the hermit, the solitary, feels his or her heart breaking, they know it is only so they will be enlarged to hold more of the earth's shattered ones. Hermits have to die. It's part of that poverty of spirit. They have to die to their past narrow concerns. In their intense desire, they search for new means of absorbing into themselves the griefs that multiply in every direction. And what they discover is that when others go hungry, so do they. When others go homeless, so are they. When others are cold or naked, without dignity, or even without a name, so are they.
While I was living in my West Virginia hermitage, I had the opportunity to deal with what usually comes to mind when we speak about grieving or mourning. I went through the deaths of two very close family members, my father and his brother, my priest uncle. And the difference between the two, how the two of them died, highlights two different ways of viewing death. As something to be welcomed, as did St. Francis of Assisi, who spread his arms and said, "Welcome, Sister Death," or as something to be delayed as long as possible. Unhappily for me, I ended up being the, quote, designated person who had to make the final decisions surrounding both their deaths. My uncle, though 82, had never named anyone to have final say over what should or should not be done if he became too ill to express his own wishes. When he contracted a case of simple pneumonia, the sisters at the nursing home where he was then living overrode his request to remain there and had him committed to the hospital with instructions to do everything possible. I was notified and was on my way, but before I could reach his bedside, he took a very bad turn, and medical personnel connected his aged body to a ventilator. And that's a process which includes inducing total paralysis so that the person does not fight the machine, forcing air through their lungs. I understood that my uncle could waken or become aware during this process to the terrifying inability to move, communicate in any way, unable even to blink an eyelid. When I finally saw him, he already appeared to be a corpse, but one whose chest was rising and falling as the pump beside his bed forced air into his chest. My father was his closest living relative, but having already suffered a series of strokes himself, he was unable to make any decisions regarding his brother. So once I arrived, the staff recognized me as the appropriate person to make any further decisions regarding my uncle's care. I was positive that he would never have wanted to ended up having his life prolonged in such a dreadful way, especially when it was very unlikely that he could recover. All I could do, and I did it, was sign a DNR, a Do Not Resuscitate order, that prevented any further steps being taken. But sadly, I could not have him taken off the ventilator. 2 long days later, I received a call in the middle of the night saying that my uncle had gone into cardiac arrest. I confirmed that nothing more was to be done. A few minutes later, I received another call saying that he had passed away. My grief was tempered by relief that he was finally released from such an intolerable situation. I never knew whose fear of death had caused my uncle to have such an undignified and undesirable way of dying. Unless we take steps to write down our wishes for death, similar things can happen to us. If family members fear to make such admittedly major decisions, doctors fearing a lawsuit will automatically go to extreme measures to prolong a life. No one wants to feel responsible for someone else's death, but when death is inevitable, why not let it come gently? Often it is our fear, our inability to handle loss, that stops us making such benign choices for a loved one. We live in a culture which does not know how to mourn and how to be healed by holy grief. In stark contrast, my father's death was simple and peaceful. As his legal guardian, I had made sure that the DNR was clipped to his chart, where it could be seen by anybody dealing with his care. When I arrived at the nursing home, where my dad had spent his final years, he seemed to be in a light coma, but I felt he recognized my presence. Over the next 24 hours, nurses monitored his vital signs, but did little else. He was in no obvious distress, so no useless procedures were begun. Not even oxygen or an IV were ordered, for these would only prolong a process which had obviously begun. My father was dying. My quiet vigil at his bedside comforted me as I watched a man calmly consent to death. He obviously was not fighting what was happening. Even when there was a significant change in his breathing patterns, and I summoned a nurse, he only stood there at the end of the bed and monitored what was happening. He stayed with me, something I truly appreciated, but did nothing. Together we watched as my father, now 83, crossed gently into another state of life, where I hoped he would be reunited with my mom and others whom he loved. I was the one left behind, while he moved on to the next stage of his journey. I had already spent many years mourning for him, for he had lost his ability to communicate and to be with us mentally. But with his death, I was truly and finally orphaned. Until then, he at least had been there. But now he was not, and my mourning took a different turn. Now that Sister Death had taken him completely, it was up to me to embrace more fully Sister Grief. Our culture has lost so many rituals of mourning that many of us are left helpless when death comes, and we try to put on that stiff upper lip which seems to be extolled as a sign of moral courage. Is it? From one who knows a little bit more about death and loss, I believe it takes more fortitude to allow our feelings of loss and grief to be expressed for as long as we need. The grief we feel at the death of a loved one goes through stages, and it is often a 3-year process before we have completed all the steps. We grieve for many reasons, and all of them should be honored with appropriate mourning.
Therapists the world over have pointed out that mourning, the public expression of sorrow, actually helps us to integrate grief, and that the inability to mourn our losses results in depression, can even lead to psychosis, and physical illness. Until we can live with the reality of the loss of loved ones, the loss of a particular relationship, the loss of a piece of whom we ourselves once were, places and pastimes that was so much a part of us and involved us so much. Until then, we've not integrated our grief. We've not accepted our losses. Today's consumer society that is so focused on acquisition and control has a very, very difficult time letting go.
Yes.
We can't let go of anything. So much so that even when we have no room for more, we go and rent storage facilities somewhere else to put the stuff that we have no use for and no place for, simply because we can't let go of it. We're just not living in reality. We're not living in a mindful way. And if we're not living in a mindful way, as we've mentioned and examined, looked at in previous presentations, we can never be really present to the presence in our lives. So accepting our losses and mourning and grieving will eventually lead to comfort, but the road to that comfort is not through denial. It's not only the death of people we love that causes us to mourn. We have only to think of that repentant woman at the feet of Christ. With her tears, she was mourning the damage her actions had caused, both to others and herself. Bearers of God's own image. We can think, too, of the tears of the Apostle Peter when the cock crowed after his third denial of Christ. Hours before, he had nearly killed a man in his passion to protect and defend his master. And then, since then, he'd even been too afraid to even admit that he knew him. Finally came Peter's flood of tears for Christ's suffering, for him and for himself, for having been a coward and a liar. Well, anyone who's lived to adulthood has a large supply of memories that arouse shame and regret. Lies told, times of cowardice, help we have not given, forgiveness we have refused, passions given free rein, and harm that's been caused to others. There's a great deal in our lives for which we can only lament, do penance, and seek forgiveness. We share with you now one of the oldest stories that goes back to the days of the fathers and mothers of the early Middle Eastern desert. There is a saint who, perhaps more than any other, symbolizes a life of mourning. Now, before you start to roll your eyes, as is the temptation when we think of an entire life given over to mourning, just listen a moment. This figure is known to history as Mary of Egypt, a woman of the 5th century. If you explore any Orthodox church, and you'll probably find her icon. It's an image of an emaciated, white-haired woman wearing very little and standing among barren forms that suggest a desert setting. Each year during Lent, in every Orthodox parish, there's a public reading of the story of how one of the ancient desert fathers, the monk Zosima, who lived in the desert southeast of Jerusalem, one day caught sight of a human figure disappearing into the bushes. He pursued the stranger and heard her voice calling on him to turn his eyes away, since she wasn't wearing anything. Father Zosimer gave her his cloak, after which she spoke to him from a distance, telling him how in Alexandria she had abandoned herself to promiscuous pleasures and diversions. And then, on a whim, she joined a group of pilgrims going to Jerusalem, seducing some of them along the way.
Oh dear.
Then, when she was in Jerusalem, she experienced a miracle. Looking at the icon of Christ's mother in the church courtyard, the simple image of self-giving love and purity, Mary was overwhelmed with remorse. She entered the church and was venerating a relic of the cross when she heard a voice telling her, "If you cross the Jordan, you will find peace." Well, taking these few words literally, for 47 years she lived a solitary life, praying day and night, fighting her own invisible war with her demons, surviving on plants and spring water. The monk Zosimer visited her a second time to bring her Holy Communion. On his third visit, he discovered her dead body. She had left a message in the sand to let him know that she had died on the night of Christ's Passion. Now, the figure of Mary of Egypt is one of those saints who sum up for many people everything that's wrong with Christianity. Measured against our modern definitions of sanity, Mary of Egypt is quite simply a lunatic. Her unnecessary, church-instilled guilt, as people would say, over alleged sins turned her into a masochist living in caves, nearly starving herself to death, and for what? A few wild years in her youth. We can choose to look at it that way. We can choose to regard Mary from that point of view. But we have to remember that for most of Christian history, anyway, saints such as Mary of Egypt were universally regarded as models of lucidity, not madness. They represented the sanity of repentant mourning, something that's in definitely short supply these days. The tears that they shed over their past sins restored the image of God in themselves. They had sinned on a grand scale, so they repented on a similar scale. It wasn't that they imagined that their sacrifices would buy God's mercy. No. Rather, they saw their ascetic life as a way of washing themselves clean in the presence of God.
Rabbi Heschel wrote something a few days before his death, which is often quoted. He wrote, "There is an old idea in Judaism that God suffers when man suffers. There's a very famous text saying that even when a criminal is hanged on the gallows, God cries. God identifies himself with the misery of that poor man. Hermits and solitaries also cry when a criminal is hanged. For though their immersion in the spiritual world where we are all united bonds them even with the criminals, because they have gradually dawned the heart of love which God shares with them. It is a painful burden, one beyond the strength of anyone who tries to carry it alone. The solitary who is growing into the mystic realm, however, soon discovers that he or she never carries it alone. Each day deepens a relationship with the divine, which includes its blessed power and strength. The wonder of this mystical exchange is not that God helps the prayer bear the burden, but that God wants to, that God is there. The prophetic hermit, the solitary of the future, is growing, should be growing, into the life of the Beatitudes. And they say by their lives that what one does to another human being, one does to their source. Harming any living creature harms God Himself.
When we think about this beatitude, again, in a similar vein with the beatitude about poverty and spirit, it takes the focus away from us and moves the focus of our attention outward. It's St. Paul who says, we know that all of creation, is groaning in labor pains, even until now. And not only that, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we also groan within ourselves as we wait for the redemption of our bodies. For creation itself will be set free. Those who choose to mourn, Jesus promises they shall be comforted. And we can't neglect to end this presentation this evening on that note. The promise is, for those who mourn, they shall be comforted. And again, the word in the Greek New Testament for comfort, panakalein, means not only to be comforted or consoled, it also has the meaning of finding an ally or a helper. It has the sense of being cheered on and encouraged. And it also has that sense of being invited to a banquet, to the festivity and to the joy and to the laughter at a banquet. If any of you can remember the last time you were at a big dinner party with a lot of friends, the laughter predominated. Sometimes the translation of this beatitude is, "Blessed are those who cry now. One day, they shall laugh." It's that gentle laughter of knowing that God is there for us.
And now we will bless our light and begin our prayer service. We bless this light and this prayer time in the name of the one who creates life, in the name of the Savior who loves life, in the name of the Spirit who is the fire of life. We will now listen to the wonderful hymn by Foley called God hears the cry of the poor. Pondering on and listening to this song about how the Lord hears the cry of the poor, we realize that we are among those poor whom the Lord hears when we express the cries of our own hearts. Mourning, grieving, feeling the pain of loss are all human needs, which, if allowed and ritualized fully, will bring us to the promised gift of being comforted, of reaching the point where we may even be able to celebrate the wonder of a human life which has achieved its consummation, where we may even be able to laugh heartfully once again. Today we are inviting you to participate, not in a guided imagery, but rather a guided memory experience. Allow yourself to relax, to loosen tight clothing, loosen tight facial expressions, wiggle your toes, shake your hands, move your shoulders and neck. Let relaxation flow through your body from head to toe like a gentle shower. As you get into a comfortable position, Allow your memory to take you to a time when someone you love has died. It may be your first experience of such a loss, or your clearest memory. Who is the person who has died? How are they related to you? What does that person mean to you? Feel your feelings at this moment. Why did this particular death come back to you? Is the memory of this death still painful to you? Do you wonder if perhaps you've not given sufficient time to mourning the loss of this person, of feeling what happened to you? If you had not taken that time, why not? What prevented you from mourning fully at the time you now recall? Do you now feel the need to honor the memory of your loved one by grieving more now? Does anything prevent you from doing so? If not, allow yourself now to feel your lingering sorrow. Your unresolved pain. Perhaps you still have some grief work to do. Resolve to allow it to happen and to lead you through to the promised comfort.
There was a man in Bethany who was very ill. His name was Lazarus, and his sisters were Martha and Mary. And they sent a message to Jesus saying, "The one whom you love is ill." So he said to his disciples, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up." After 2 days of travel, Jesus approached Bethany and learned that Lazarus had died. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she ran out to meet him and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live." Martha ran back to the house to say to her sister, "The teacher is here, and he's calling for you." So Mary got up quickly and went to him. And when she found him, she knelt at his feet with tears in her eyes and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her, he wept. And those who were present said, "See how he loved him." They took Jesus to the tomb of Lazarus. It was a cave with a stone laid against it. And Jesus said, "Take the stone away." But Martha objected, "Lord, my brother's been dead for 4 days. Already there's a stench." And Jesus replied, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God?" So they rolled the stone away, and Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Lazarus stepped out of the cave, his body still bound in strips of cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him. Let him go." And there were many who believed because of this sign. As we close our prayer together this evening, let's give thanks for the day that has been and pray for the life of the world. You wept at the death of a friend, O Christ. You showed sorrow at the sufferings of others. Give us the strength to express sadness and the confidence to call forth new life. Open our eyes to see every family as part of one family. Open our lips to speak words of hope. Once again, we want to thank everyone who has joined us this evening. It's been our privilege to share this time with you. For those of you who are finding us for the first time, if you wish to contact us, you can do so by email at pkfredette@frontier.com, or you can visit our website, ravensbreadministries.com, and on the Contact Us page, you can get in touch with us that way. We want to thank all of those who have been sharing regularly with us, those who have given us so much help in making these presentations possible. We want to say thank you and we appreciate you. And now we ask the blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and of sky, on all those we love this night, and on every human family, the gifts of heaven, the gifts of earth, the gifts of sea and sky. Good night, and God bless you.
God be with you.